Some people may call this thing ugly. Beauty's obviously in the eye of the beholder, but this thing, from what I've seen, flies amazing. Welcome to video number 4 in the Nurial Glacial series. Making some good progress on this plane. Last video, we got the tail section completed. So our horizontal stabs, vertical stabs, that stuff's all done. This video, we're getting into the wings, motor mounting, and landing gear mounting. So lots of technical things. So let's dive back in to this plane. So one of the cool things that comes with this glacial aircraft is all of the templates. So the templates are used for all the holes and openings and such. I think this is the next template we need to use for cutting the wing servo openings. Now we need to do 4 of these. I'm going to do a little bit of research and figuring out on this, and we'll come back and take a look at how this jives with the wings. All right, so we're kind of working on a bunch of things. First thing we've got laid out here is the landing gear. Now we'll get back to that in a second. We've got our wings laid out as well too, and we're going to do our servo pockets for the wing. That is what this template is for. So to show you here, basically you tuck it up, gives you your servo pocket location. Obviously your arm is this way. And then you've got your control horn mounting location there. So, and then when you flip it over to this side, you flip it over, take this piece out, turn it to the other side. So we'll get back to that. I'm just getting some of the gluing stuff done so that can cure while we work on the wings. So with the landing gear, we've got to get the gear legs drilled out first. So the 2 holes right here line up perfectly. The 3rd hole is too far. It's mounted in the center of this plate. So the actual end of this little channel right there is ideally what we're going to drill the hole out to. So if I look through that hole right there, I can just see the tip of that slot. So this does need to get sanded down a little bit. And then our blind nuts get mounted to the actual gear leg itself. So when this gets mounted in the fuselage, these tuck through the fuselage and you put your screws in through the top, obviously going through your blind nuts mounted in the leg. So first thing we're going to do is get the legs drilled out, and we also need to prep our 3mm blind nuts to go in the legs as well. All right, so we've got our 3mm blind nuts here. The first thing we want to do with these guys is get the little sharp tabs bent down because we don't want those grinding into our carbon gear legs. So I might have to use a more serious set of pliers. But we just take those, bend them down so they're nice and flat. So that's what we're going to do to prep all of our blind nuts. And then we're going to drill an appropriate size hole through the leg. And that hole needs to easily accept the blind nut sliding into that hole. So this is the same type of stuff that we did on our wing mounting plates as well. All right, so to prep the landing gear, all the blind nuts have had their little flanges flattened down. We've drilled holes in the landing gear, sanded the tip of the landing gear down so they don't contact each other, and of course, roughened up our areas where our blind nuts are going to mount to. These blind nuts should just drop in place like that. Gives us a good gluing surface. The actual hole is perfect. It's basically zero play in there, so it should be very accurate. We obviously need to make sure we don't have any toe out on our landing gear, but if everything is drilled properly and set up properly, it should be really close. All right, so there it is all assembled. Looks really good, very, very accurate. So there's actually, if we loosen these off, there's really no adjustment to these guys unless we actually change the dimensions on our holes. So very strong. If you take this and manipulate it and move it around, it's actually a lot stronger than I thought it was going to be. So there's the top side there with all the Seacraft washers and our 3mm hardware. So what we'll do now is we are going to get this guy lined up and see how the alignment is. So all we're going to do for that is take a carbon rod, clamp it onto each leg like this. And those are going to be quite long, and then we can measure the distance between the ends of the carbon rod and that's going to tell us whether this is flush, toe in, toe out, and we can get these aligned and set up. All right, so hopefully that's, you can see this, but we've just taken 2 small clamps, a section of carbon rod. Right now those things are sitting level, but as soon as you clamp them, they sit nice and flush with the gear plates, wheel plates, whatever you want to call them. So all we're going to do is we're just going to take this ruler and we're just going to measure this out. So in between these two, we've got about 55 centimeters. And the back one here, I think I calculated that front one wrong. So we've got 52 in between. I can see just by looking at this, it looks like there's just a little bit of toe in, which is perfect. So 52 centimeters on that one, and this guy, yeah, so that's perfect. So we're at 50, roughly 50 and a half. So we've got 1.5 well, at this distance, we've got 1.5 centimeters or 15 millimeters, which is roughly 5/8 of an inch if you're imperial system of toe in. So just a little bit of toe in the factory holes, which is perfection. So that is awesome. So what we can do now is we can undo each of these blind nuts one at a time, get some high sol mixed up, get them reinstalled, and that should be perfect. I mean, those blind nuts are sitting perfectly where they need to go, so really we actually don't even need to do that. I'm going to give that some thought, but we'll see how much plays in those blind nuts, but that system worked out great. All right, so we are going to glue these just sitting like this because they're such an accurate fit with the blind nut. So we've got our bolts threaded in here, so what we can do is just push these guys up and put some high sol around the blind nut, and then we'll suck it down nice and tight and let those things cure. And while we're mixing adhesive, we will get our front gear installed. So again, we're about 70 millimeters is the actual number. So 70 millimeters from the leading edge of this former to the leading edge of this guy. And that's going to put it in the right spot. So what I'll do, I'll show you guys this too, is we'll get this leveled out compared to the fuselage, spot glue it in place, and then we'll glue the rest of it with our high sol. So anyways, we'll get to that in a little bit. All right, so there is our 2 legs. Everything's screwed in place, glued in place, and we're just going to leave those to do their thing. So that will be perfect. Now we're going to move on to the mount inside the fuselage. All right, so working on our gear mount here, we're obviously wanting to make sure that this is level in relation to the rest of the fuselage. So if we take our angle finder here, our protractor, basically that's 0.10 degrees, so it's essentially level, let's say. Hopefully that's showing up on camera for you guys. The lighting's a bit weird. So we can take that, we can also put it right here on the plate for the rudder. Not that that's really going to be level, because that could have been glued in crooked, but that is giving us a reading as well too. Just checking it out here. And then we can do this one. So again, same thing, we're 0.3, so roughly the same kind of degrees here to here. So if we take those numbers and transfer that to our front gear mount, that's going to ensure that it is essentially very, very level. So all we're going to do now is we are going to, number 1, measure the distance on that gear. So that is 70 millimeters. So I'm going to get this in the right spot to begin with, and then we'll worry about our angle. So we're moving this back, and we had this out of the fuselage, which is why it's in a different spot. It does fit very accurately, so I don't suspect that the angle is going to be off much at all. So front of the main fuselage former to the front of this rear former on the gear, 70 millimeters, 7 centimeters, so we're basically bang on. So now with that in the right spot, now we can take our angle finder, put it on there, see where we're at. So that is saying 0.6. So we can get that a little bit more accurate. We've got a little bit of wiggle room there. Just trying to figure out which direction. There we go. So now our gear plate is zeroed. Up here, we're basically 0. Back here, same thing. So we're very even on all of our reference points. Now we're going to double check our measurement again. So just confirming that we're still at 70, which we are. So 7 centimeters, 70 millimeters. So now what we do is we take some CA. So this is medium CA. And we're just going to tack this in place in a couple spots. So you're not really doing much. All you're doing is putting a drop of CA, a drop of CA. Then we'll spray some kicker on there. And all that's doing is holding it in the right spot. So when we run high sol or aero epoxy on everything, it doesn't move. There, so now that is stuck in place. We can take our angle finder again, check our measurements. So we're zeroed on the fuselage, and check our gear plate. So very, very close. So within 40% of 1 degree, I'd say that's good. So now we'll take our high sol and we will work that in between the structure and the fuselage. Remember in one of the first videos, because this inside of this fuselage was done with peel ply when the structure was made or when the whole thing was made, you don't need to do any sanding on these surfaces. They're already aggressive enough, very good to receive aero epoxy. All right, so the way this works, I actually had this backwards initially. So the servo goes towards the center line of the wing, and the slot goes towards the outside of the wing, for as much as that matters. It does matter with the servo location though, because there is some plywood. I can see if I get my head in the right spot here, I can see the plywood on the opening. Now I'm using a pen or a Sharpie to mark these out first, and then I'll go back and do them afterwards. And the reason I'm doing that is because our HV69 servos, the MKS servos, they're actually smaller than this opening here. So we may, once we get this opened up, we may have to do a little bit of filling with plywood like we did on the elevators on that section right there. So totally fine though, it's not a problem at all. So this side here, this is the last one to do. So you can see the pointy side of this template goes towards the center line of the wing, and just mark this guy out. Just free-handing the cross piece there. That's the reason for my black marks on the template. And then these guys is just a reminder that we can also narrow up that servo pocket a little bit as well, because the HV69 is a bit narrow compared to the larger servo that's designed to go in there. So now we've got them all marked out. Now we're going to take our Dremel and we'll just gently do these guys and get them opened up. Do a bit of experimenting on the first one. We may have to go a little bit further than the black marks as far as the opening goes, but we want to size those properly for those HV69 servos. So we got all 4 of our openings for the servo done. These worked out really well. Our initial marks here are on the tip of my finger, and we had to go about 4 millimeters past, which was perfect because they're adjusted perfectly for those HV69 servos, and our control arm pockets are great as well too. So next thing we're going to do is we're just going to rub this down with some alcohol, get rid of our Sharpie marks, and then we want to outline our control horn in tape so we can get those high soled in place and peel the tape off for a nice clean glue joint. And all of our horns are now glued in place. So what I like to do, like I mentioned before, is give this a little bit of time, keep coming back and checking on them and just repositioning them. We heated this Hysol up so it'll kick off in about an hour, hour and a half kind of thing. Start to firm up a little bit anyways. And that'll still allows us to make any small adjustments, but we'll just keep continuing to check on this over the next couple hours. But that's pretty much all of our gluing for today. That's really all that we can do without disturbing anything. All right, so it's the next day. We're just checking on all of our parts here. Everything looks like they all cured perfectly. I don't think I touched on this with the servo opening. So what I did was I took my Dremel and I opened these guys up, and then I just took a regular small file and just slowly worked these openings until the servo fit perfectly. But those look good. All of our control horns are solid, and our front landing gear plate is solid as well. So moving on to some more gluing. Next thing I want to glue in is our engine motor mount. Sorry, motor mount. It's not an engine. So here is the contra drive setup. So basically this mounts, this carbon plate mounts in the front of the aircraft. Now, generally when you're setting up an aircraft, a regular prop aircraft, it's going to have left and down thrust built into it. With this setup, according to Lassie, which is the manufacturer, this is flush. So it gets flat mounted, 0 degrees or as close to 0 as possible, and that's what we're going to do. So basically, I've been thinking about this since yesterday on how to mount this guy, and I think I've got a good solution. So essentially, step number 1 is going to be mounting this plate as close to 0 as possible inside the nose of the aircraft. Coming from the jet world, we basically don't, well, here in the shop, we don't assume that the manufacturers put Loctite on anything. So that's also going to be something that we'll go through, is taking out all of our fasteners on this guy and just confirming that everything has Loctite and everything's installed properly. And the way this mounts is the motor mounts towards the underside of the aircraft. And a couple reasons for that. I don't think it would fit any other way. So if we try and put the motor on top, the wires end up contacting the fuselage, probably could be done, but also there's an opening right here which allows air to flow over the motor setup. So if we go like this, that gives you an idea of how things get installed. So the big challenge, how do we get that zeroed out? Well, I've got some ideas. All right, so first thing I'm doing is just checking our spacing and everything before we do any drastic things like glue anything. So what I've done here is basically pulled our nut off of our drive system and just got this mocked up in the fuselage, getting the cone installed and just seeing how everything, number 1, fits on there. So with that, we've got, that actually looks pretty good. It's got to get shifted up just a little bit, so we've got the cones kind of sitting off center a little bit. So just for reference here, the cone's kind of sitting down a little bit. So what I'll do is I'm going to pop this guy out here. So if we check our actual plate, so we've got a little hunk of carbon right there, which actually could, and that one right there, which could prevent this guy from sitting up properly. So we want to make sure that we sand that off. We've also got a bit of an angle on this guy as well too. So actually this plate should be flipped around. So I'm going to make those changes, get rid of those little sanding marks, flip the plate around because it's got an angle, I'm exaggerating it, but it's got an angle like this. So if we flip it around, it's going to sit a little bit better inside that nose cone. So let's make those changes and see what happens. All right, so we've got our little bit of sanding done. That looks good. I'm just putting the nut on the end here. And the reason for that is so we get our cone and everything attached actually level and snug. So we can make our adjustments after that. So that is a huge difference. That actually spaced it out very well. Just flipping that thing around and getting rid of like 3 of those sanding tabs is perfect. So that is wonderful. That actually is really nice for positioning. Yeah, that turned out great. So when I hold that up now and push it forward, so it looks like we can adjust that slightly. So I'll give you guys a shot from the front end here, and that'll give you some perspective on what I'm looking at. So if I take that motor and push it forward, so it's nice and flush against the whole surrounding area there. And now I'm going to look down the side of that cone and get it leveled out. So now we're leveled out. Look through the top of the cone, side to side, get it leveled out. So you can see there, we're sitting a little bit low on the bottom. Sorry, the whole cone is sitting a little bit low in the opening. So what we want to do is we kind of want to take that carbon thing and just get it moved up. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to take that carbon piece mounted on the contra drive, rotate it 180 degrees, see if that makes a difference before we do any sanding on it. All right, guys, well, that was the trick for this. Yeah, it turned out perfect now. So I won't spend a bunch of time here, but I'll just get it roughly side to side, up and down. There we go. So if you look, now we are beautiful all the way around that opening. That worked out great. So there is a reference mark on that carbon plate I will show you. And these are all things that I haven't been able to find in a manual anywhere. So it's a little concerning sometimes when you're trying to install stuff like this for the very first time and there's no documentation anywhere or anything like that. So that is going to be perfect. So the way we're going to get this lined up from the side here. So what I'm thinking about doing is this cone is going to be probably our best reference point. And if we get that adjusted properly all the way around, it should be bang on 0. So probably the easiest way to do this is figure out what kind of spacing we need, and we'll just put a couple spacers in around that cone. And once we're happy with everything, then we'll just tack it with some CA on the back side, and then we can take this all apart and high sol the plate in place. So we're perfectly level everywhere. So I'm going to work on my spacer setup here. We just need to find something thickness-wise that is the right thickness. If I take this, get it lined up nice and flat, you know, that carbon is too thick. It's close, but it's too thick. So I need to figure out a spacer setup, probably a couple little pieces of wood, and we'll come back and take a look. All right, guys, so this worked out perfect. We found some plywood that was 2.6466 millimeters, and it just tucked in there nicely. It's got a bit of pressure on that cone and worked out so nice. So right now, we've got 3 pieces installed. So bottom, side, top. And that is got everything in alignment perfectly. So now our gap is centered all the way around. That contra drive motor assembly is all sitting perfectly. And then if I look from the front, we've got a nice gap right there, nice gap right there. We're nice and level all the way around. So that is wonderful. I think the next thing to do is we're going to spot glue that from the inside and just put a couple drops of CA. And then the other thing is our ear mounts here. So these basically get glued onto the side of the fuselage like that. And you've got a little slot here and a little slot right there. So that has a bolt system or whatever, a fastener system that you can put through there. that gets all of that in alignment. So, and then when you go to take the contour drive out, you just have to undo it from the front, give it a twist to pass the ears, and then it'll come out. So we have a bit of gluing to do, but we're gonna work on getting the gluing done. I'm happy that we figured that step out. That is very rewarding. All right, so next thing we're doing here, this is not going to be pretty, I'll warn you that right now, but it is kind of the best way in my mind to get this thing glued. So fortunately this plane is very light, so managing it is quite simple. So what we're gonna do on its nose, and I'm just going to get some drops of CA installed on that plate. And the point of doing all that is so we can get the plate tacked in place, and then we will glue it afterwards with aero epoxy. Got 2 on one side. Spray some kicker on there to get that solidified. Wicked. Now, the other thing with the ears is we don't have to put the ears on the back side of that plate. We can put the ears on the front side of the plate, and then the contour drive, if you need to take it out, will just slip right out. I thought about that while we're getting this all lined up. So we'll get that kind of planned out here, but that, I think, worked beautifully. So now with our plate spot glued in place, we should be able to take these guys out. Obviously we have to be very gentle with it at this point because it's not solid, just held in place with 4 drops of CA. This is a 19mm socket in case you're wondering what size we're using. So we'll get all this taken off. That was fantastic. So now I'm going to put a couple drops of CA on this side, and that's going to for sure tack it in place. It is solid, so that's good. Happy with that. So the marks I was referring to on the plate here is if you look on the top side, right in the center, there's a little tiny notch. Now that notch, I think, indicates which side goes up towards the top, because once we got it all laid out like that, the alignment was perfect. So that is good, happy with all that. The next thing is going to be spot gluing our little ears in place there. You can see we still have good access from this side as well too. So we will work on getting that lined up next. All right, so we got our ears installed, but I just installed the cone and everything again just to double check and make sure that we're happy with everything before we start taking things apart, and it looks awesome. Absolutely perfect alignment, and you can see there how our little ears got glued in. So I got them tucked in the position. Through the front here, I was holding them in place with an Allen key. I was a bit, you know, I dropped it like 5 or 10 times on each side, but got them held in place, Allen key pushing from the front, and just put a couple drops of thin or medium CA on there just to hold it in place. So now when we undo that contour drive from the front, so there's 2 bolts holding it in place right now, there's going to be 4 eventually, that will just come off from the whole assembly and slip out of the way. So that is wonderful. So we're going to take that apart now, and that allows us the opportunity to glue that in place and get it solidly and permanently mounted. All right, so we got everything glued, turned out very nice, happy with that. So the ears are glued, the front's glued, and there's a shot from the front side. So generally I wouldn't use a nozzle for this kind of thing with my aero epoxy, my high sol, but in this type of situation, having that nozzle is valuable. Lets you put down a nice bead around the perimeter and then tool it with your finger. So that is awesome. Happy with that. That is wonderful. I think the next thing to work on is our gear openings here, which is definitely a big stressor. You know, it's funny when you're working on projects like this that you're not overly familiar with, so you have to do a lot of thinking, and it's not like putting a turbine aircraft together where you kind of just follow the process, and I've done it so many times it's easy. This type of thing makes me use my gray matter, which is good. But there's a couple of stressful things that I usually spend a lot of time thinking about, and one of those things was mounting that contra drive front plate there. The second thing is the gear opening cutouts, which I don't think will be so bad. Obviously, you just want to take it slow and make them as small as possible, not massive, huge openings. So that's the goal. All right, so we got one gear mounted, worked out great. I'll show you my process here on the other side. So that one's bolted in. So what I did was I took a piece of orange tape, first of all, and looking through the top, I just kind of ran the tape down right in the middle of that gear plate. So just visually getting it set right in the middle of the gear plate as I was looking down the side. And then took my ruler, middle of the gear plate, and I'm at 155-ish on the measuring, the ruler. And so the plywood plate's like 4.5 millimeters thick. So I just went to the 160 mark, wrapped it down, and put a mark there. Now the tape was here. I marked the edges of the tape, pulled the tape off, and then just finished my line. Now when I use my Dremel and do this slot, I'm actually tucking it up against the underside of the gear plate, going from end to end, and then we just opened it up, probably about 7 millimeters or so, to allow the gear to tuck in. Because the gear is not exactly thin, you've got the actual gear thickness plus the thickness of the blind nuts to consider. So anyways, that's how things worked out. So quite straightforward. We're going to get this guy opened up and get those gear mounted. All right, so we got our opening done there. I'm pretty much 100% sure that's the right size. Yes. So now we just pull our nuts off. Now we pull our fasteners off with our washers. So now the important thing is, number one, that it actually slips in there, which it does. Just enough space for everything. And then we will get everything kind of lined up. And it looks good from the top side. We've got a little bit of contact on this back section right there. Yeah, just a little bit of excess that we need to get rid of, so we'll just touch that up and it'll be 100%. So now, sneak that in there. Perfect. That is great. Awesome, fits beautiful. So let's get this bolted down. All right, guys, that wraps up video number 4 in the Nurial Glacial aircraft. I'm trying to keep these videos as detailed as possible to cover all the things that I had to research, figure out and find out or figure out by myself. And that's the point of why I'm being so detailed with this aircraft. Ultimately, it's a pretty simple aircraft when you get down to it, but those little details are going to make a big difference, and that's what I'm trying to focus on in these videos. Thank you, channel members, for being channel members. If you're watching this and thinking, what the heck is a channel member? Well, let me tell you, channel membership is a paid thing, but our channel members get to see all of our videos early. I usually have about 1 to 2 weeks of videos uploaded to YouTube, and channel members get to see those videos as soon as they're uploaded. So the F-15 in the background, for example, the uncrating of that video, that came out to channel members about a week before it was actually live on YouTube. So that's one of the perks, or the perk, of channel membership. And then of course you're supporting the channel with some extra funds. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you, channel members, for supporting the channel. This thing is exciting me more and more the closer we get to completing it, because it's just a beautiful package. So next video, video number 5, we may wrap it up, I'm not sure, but we still have a lot of little details to sort out. We've got the landing gear to sort out. We've got to mount our servos, which that should be pretty straightforward. So maybe, fingers crossed, we'll wrap this thing up in video number 5. We'll see how things go. Thanks guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.